Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Whitney Johnson join us. Whitney, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, so you are a consultant, a speaker, an author. You're also the CEO, founder of Disruption Advisors, where you help companies grow by empowering the individuals within them. And you worked with many well-known organizations, Morgan Stanley, WD-40, HubSpot, Dropbox, and a whole bunch of others. And your most recent book, which we'll talk more about and make sure people can find out more about it as well, is called Smart Growth, how to grow your people to grow your company. Did I get all that right?
Yes, you did.
All right. Well, let's get started today. I'd love to kind of take us back to the early days before you actually started Disruption Advisors, and also it has your name as part of the company name. What were you doing kind of before the consulting business? What did your career look like?
All right. So, very thumbnail sketch of my career. I studied music in college, and when I graduated, I had gotten married, and so I moved to New York with my husband, who was getting his PhD. And because it was going to take 5 to 7 years and there's not very much money, someone had to put food on the table. I was the designated food putter on the table person.
Yeah.
Didn't really actually want to do music. I had done it, but I didn't want to. And so I got a job and started working as a secretary to a Wall Street stockbroker because, as I said, I was a music major. So I wasn't really qualified to do many things at that point. But what was so exciting is that I had grown up on the West Coast. I didn't really know what Wall Street was. So I would go to work every day and hear people say things like throw down your pom-poms and get in the game, and all these sort of testosterone laden conversations, and realized I needed to throw down my pom-poms, which I had been a cheerleader in high school. So I really needed to throw down my pom-poms. And so I just discovered Wall Street and realized this is exciting. I want to do this. And so I started taking business courses at night, accounting, finance, economics, had a boss who believed in me, which allowed me to move from being a secretary to an investment banker. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years. Then my boss got fired. So basically we got disrupted, and they probably would have fired me too, except for I had really good performance reviews. And so they moved me, but really shoved me into something called equity research, where it was my job to build financial models and make a stock call. Turns
Right.
out that disruption was really good because I was very good at picking stocks. And so I ended up becoming an institutional investor ranked stock analyst, did that for about 8 years, then decided this time to disrupt myself, became an entrepreneur, connected with Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School, started the Disruptive Innovation Fund with him and his son, did that for about 5 years. And then a decade ago, so back in 2012, I had written an article in the Harvard Business Review called Disrupt Yourself, where I was applying the theory of disruptive innovation to the individual. It had a lot of interest, and I realized, you know what, I actually am more interested in the momentum of people than I am of stocks. And so I disrupted myself again and have for the last 10 years been writing and speaking and building this business, which is now Disruption Advisors, which is a tech-enabled talent development company. And we provide people with tools to see where they are in their growth. And then we coach and we advise and we consult all around that. And so that is the thumbnail sketch of how I got from college to this conversation that you and I are having today.
Yeah, there's so much in there. I think we can just end the interview right now and we're done. No, I'm joking. That's so. There's so much I want to explore about what you are doing today, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't take us a little bit further back and kind of go a bit deeper into some of that kind of career trajectory and path that you took. It sounds like you mentioned disruption several times throughout
Yeah.
your career, but I also felt, if I was kind of like a viewer of that career from a high level, it feels like there was a lot of upward momentum and movement. It didn't sound like there was a lot of challenge, and I don't
Oh,
mean that in the sense that like that you didn't go through any challenges, but
yeah.
I'm wondering, you pulled yourself consistently through disruption
Mhm.
and kept moving kind of higher and higher, making progress. When you look back over that time, is there kind of a characteristic or a habit that you developed that you feel
Mm.
really was like integral to you being able to continue to kind of reach new plateaus, but moving higher and higher each time?
Mm. It's such a great question. And I don't know how to describe it other than the fact that there is something deep inside of me that is just driven to grow, driven to make progress. And to your point, it sounds like it's always been upward momentum, but there have been lots of, steps back. I mean, starting with the fact that I didn't actually graduate from college until I was 27 because I didn't know what I wanted to do or be. And I took 2 years to live in Latin America as a missionary. I didn't know what I wanted to actually graduate in. As you heard, I got pushed into equity research. So there were lots and lots of steps back, but
Hmm.
there is something in my psyche of how do I continue to make progress and how do I take something that doesn't work and make meaning of it? One of the tenets of personal disruption is you step back to slingshot forward. And so how do I take those steps back and always turn them into something that I can make meaning of in a positive way and I can and use that to help myself make progress and also help people around me make progress as well. So I think it's I want to call it grit, but I don't know that that's how Angela Duckworth would describe it. But there is some sort of drive, deep, integral to who I am, to use that word that you just used, to make
Yeah.
progress, to grow, to move forward.
Do you know where that comes from? Like, was that part of your upbringing, your
Mm.
childhood, something that happened in the past? Like, if you kind of look back at that, where that drive comes from, anything
Yeah,
stand out?
it's such a great question, Michael. So I think it's a combination of things. So I'm a big fan of the Enneagram. And are you familiar with the
I
Enneagram?
am, yeah.
Okay, so you'll probably not be surprised to hear that I am a one on the Enneagram. And a one, for those who aren't familiar, is an improver, a reformer, a person who wants to make the world better. And I think that that is just very much explains a lot. But I think in terms of where that sort of approach the world came from, I'm an oldest child. My parents got married because my mom was pregnant with me. And, that's very different today than it was when I was born. And so
Mm,
there was a sense of if I can be successful, then I'll make up for the mistake that my mother feels like she made in marrying my father. And so this need to prove myself, to sort of make everything be okay, I think is very much something that animated who I was. And so, yes, there was some challenge in that. It would have been nice if things were different. Um, and yet I wonder, who would I be if I hadn't had that experience of always feeling like I needed to improve and get better. Now, part of my adult life is letting go of some of that, but certainly in my younger years, that was very much a driving force, for which I am very grateful because it pushed me to always want to do better and to be better.
as you were talking, I couldn't help but think about kind of two big boxes, kind of segments of or ways of looking at how people make an impact.
Mm,
And on one side, I see a lot of people who are very focused, like deep in their work, and that might be like writing or speaking, but essentially they're just creating something and kind of getting it out into the world. And then there's another group of people that may not necessarily create as much, but
mm.
their teams, on the surface at least, much more focused on relationships. Like they're getting in front of people, they're having conversations. Do you feel that you fit into either one of those more than the other, or are you in the middle? Like how would you look at what really
Yeah.
impact on your overall growth as a person? And we'll get to the business, but is it more just creating and putting stuff out there, or is it more relationships, or how do you kind of think about that?
You know what, Michael, that's such a great question, one that I have never been asked before, but when you ask me the question, I think I fall somewhere in the middle.
Mm,
Because on the one hand, I mean, you look at my body of work of being able to say, okay, so I'm an equity analyst. I've now written 4 books. I took this theory of disruption and applied it to the individual. I took this notion of the S curve that was popularized by Everett Rogers and applied that to the individual. So I'm continually looking and taking actually business theories
mhm.
repeatedly, because I did it with stocks as well, apply them to people. Take business theories and how do I use those to help inform what does individual growth look like? So I think that I am very focused on how can I come up with ideas that will help people make progress and to your question or the other piece of it, it's always about in service of the relationship. It's
Mhm.
always about how can I explain this idea or how can I make these ideas so that they are useful so that someone can use them to make progress in their life. So I would
Yeah.
say that I straddle both of those worlds, the idea and the relationship world. Um, if I thought about it more, I might give you a different answer, but that
Yeah.
my first answer is that I straddle both worlds.
Okay. And how important has it been for you? Like you've, as you mentioned, you've taken some of these concepts
Mhm.
and reworked them or kind of reapplied them to having a different perspective or kind of a different way of seeing things and a different outcome. But that's also become like a body of work for you that you built
Yeah.
your brand around. How important do you think that is for a consultant, for somebody in professional services
Mm.
to really be known for something in terms of whether it's a methodology, an application, like you've taken the S curve and reapplied it,
Mhm.
those kinds of things. Because I think a lot of times people they don't necessarily latch on to a specific concept and then build a body of work around it. They might publish some articles, they may write a book, but it may not necessarily be around like a specific concept. I'm wondering for you, because it seems like you've done that multiple times. Is that conscious? And do you think that's a key to being successful in this business, or is that just kind of a byproduct of how you've moved through the motions?
So I think a lot of it's been instinctive. And but I think there's also been some element of it that's been very deliberate. And, if I
Mm,
think about, watching, so one of the people that was very influential for me was Clayton Christensen. And what was he known for? Disruptive innovation. I think about, someone like Bob Proctor more recently, very much known for human potential. He's a fellow
mm,
Canadian, by the way. I think about someone like Gretchen Rubin. She's known for happiness. Brene Brown is known for vulnerability, et cetera. So
mm.
what I would say is that I think you can be a very successful consultant by pulling together an amalgam of different ideas and drawing on best practices from people across the globe. Um, at the same time, I do think in general, you're going to be more successful as a consultant if you have a brand.
Yeah,
People buy brands. There's an intangible value to the brand that makes your business more successful. And so the more you can be known for something, for an idea, for an approach, how you do what you do, the more people are going to reach out to you, the bigger your brand, the more that you're able to make the choices about who you work with, when you work, and what you charge people to do. And so the answer is yes, you can be very good at what you do without being known for something. But I do think in general, if you were to do a study of all the most successful consultants, they're going to be known for a specific practice or idea where they are the best in the world, and therefore people seek them out to do that thing that they do better than anybody else.
yeah, love it. All right, so now let's kind of fast forward from the chapter that we were
Mhm.
at and kind of
Mhm.
move a little bit further into this book, and not your actual book. We'll get to that in a few moments. But
To this conversation.
exactly, yeah. So I'm wondering when you first decided to create Disruption Partners, so more than 10 years ago or so now,
Mhm.
how did you actually go out and get your first clients for that business?
Mm, it's a great question. So what I would say is, I think probably most of your consultants, well, I don't know, actually, you would know better than I, but I'll just tell you my own experience. So 2012, I write this article. I decide I want to go figure out how to build a practice, build a body of work, build a business around these ideas. Um, what I found, and I think that was that I wrote that article. So then after I
Mhm.
wrote the article, people reached out to me and said, "Hey, we want you to come speak." And so
Mm.
there was this people were reaching out to me, "We would like you to come speak to our
Right.
organization about these ideas.
And
You
Whitney,
wrote a book."
sorry to interrupt, but just to
Yeah.
confirm, so when you say that article, you're talking about the Harvard Business Review article?
Yeah, so I had written the Harvard Business Review article called Disrupt Yourself. I'd also written a book called Dare, Dream, Do, which was much more geared toward women, which, by the way, the very beginning, I thought, "Oh, I really want to focus on women." And I had a number of speaker agents tell me, "You can't focus just on women because people will not pay you to just focus on women." Very sad, but it was true. So
Wow.
they said, "You need to focus on a business audience." And so I said, "Okay, I'm going to focus on disruption." But
Mhm.
then if people want me to talk to women, of course I will, but I am going to focus on the wider business audience. And
Mm.
so the business started by people reaching out to me, wanting me to speak, and then also people reaching out and saying, "Can you coach and provide some basic coaching around how can I disrupt myself? How can my career shift?" And I would say for from 2012 to 2016-ish, my business was primarily speaking driven.
Right.
And so it was the draw, and it wasn't really a consulting practice at this point. It
Mm.
was primarily speaking, a little bit of coaching. Then in 2017, I ended up connecting with Marshall Goldsmith and had the great honor of being one of the original cohort of his 100 coaches. And so he was really an influence to me of thinking about coaching, not, just coaching for a couple $100 an hour, but, coaching CEOs and really taking my Wall Street experience and my experience of working at the feet of Clayton Christensen and using that to help people
Mm.
build businesses, et cetera. And so at that point, my business started to become not just speaking. Speaking became a little bit more of lead generation,
Right.
and then much more of a coaching practice. But then, is this the detail you want? Is
Great.
this
Yeah, keep going.
okay?
Yeah.
All right, good.
Roll.
Okay. So then this is 2017, 2018. Now I'm writing my next book, Build an A Team. At this point, I've now connected with Amy Humble, who is now the co-founder of Disruption Advisors with me. But initially, she was a consultant. And so her background is that she had been the chief of staff for Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great. So now you've got, sort of the Clayton Christensen legacy, the Jim Collins legacy. She
Mm.
and I started working together. And that's when we started doing more consulting and more coaching at scale
Yeah.
and working with organizations around building an A team. Because now we're not just talking about career transition, we're talking about how do you use these ideas of personal disruption? How do you use this S curve to build a team? And so
Mm.
2019, then we start going into organizations, coaching at scale, and then 2019, 2020, much more coaching at scale, and then advisory work, workshops, facilitated sessions, and coaching across organizations and working across organizations to help them build teams that are where the people are growing so that they can grow their team, so that they can grow their organization. And so while I still do keynote speaking, absolutely, it's flipped, and it is
Right.
a much smaller part of the business where it is an opportunity for me to evangelize, to inspire around these ideas, but then people bring us in and say, "Okay, I want to understand your technology tool." Oh, that's the other thing that we did in the last 2 years is we built out a tool,
Yeah.
so that people can say, "Well, where am I in my growth? Am I at the launch point of the curve, the sweet spot, or mastery?" So you now have this tool, this diagnostic tells you where you are in your growth. And then once you know where people are in their growth, then you've got the coaching, you've got the workshops that allow your entire company to speak the same language. And as you're speaking the same language, if everybody's growing, then the teams are growing. And if your teams are growing, guess what? Your company is growing as well.
Yeah.
So that's the evolution, speaking to coaching to the technology tool, coaching at scale, advising and consulting.
Love it. All right. You just touched on so many different areas that I want to ask you about. So I'm gonna pull us back just a little bit and then
Yeah.
dig in for a moment. You talked about the kind of the time where you decided that you were going to start offering a new service. In this case, it was kind of transitioning from just speaking and generating revenue from speaking engagements
Yeah.
to actually kind of getting more involved in the coaching side later on, software and then advisory consulting. I'm wondering for all the consultants that are listening and joining us right now who have an idea for a new product, a new service, a new offer. And let's just use the scenario that they have some existing clients, as you had some existing
Yeah.
clients that you worked with, but they were in that probably stage consuming just more of your speaking services.
Mhm.
What did you do? And maybe if there's a difference today of like the best practice or how you would approach if you had a new offer that you wanted to get out there that was different from what you were doing in the past, how
Mm.
do you go about that? Are you reaching out to past clients and saying, "Hey, we have this new thing"? Is it just a matter of mentioning it more when people reach out to you about, a new potential engagement? Just kind of walk us through what you feel is the best practice to launching a new idea and seeing if it has legs.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I would say I okay. So first of all, I would say to everybody who is a consultant and wants to build your business, you do need to have some type of calling card. Now, some of you may have such strong word of mouth, you're fine, right? You're doing really well and you for every person you work with, you get 3 or 4 more referrals. And so that may be the case. And if that is the case and you are happy, then just keep doing that. So I don't want to say that like the way I'm doing it is the right way.
Sure.
Like the
Yep.
way you're doing it. So, but I would say in my particular instance is to continue to put our work out into the world so that it's kind of the intellectual pheromones that people know where to find us and they know, okay, here's what they're doing. And if people are looking for that, then they find us.
Mm,
Um, and then we meet people where they are, meeting sometimes with an organization, our very first point of entry is someone knows me from our work and they reach out and they want me to coach the CEO. Well, now that I'm coaching the CEO and we're able to help them be even more effective as a leader, going from good to great, but then also introducing this language of the S curve, then what can sometimes happen. So, for example, with a company called Barbecue Guys, I was coaching the CEO, which, by the way, first of all, started because it was referred from someone else. But coaching the
mm,
CEO, he says, this language makes a lot of sense. Can you do a workshop where we administer this S curve tool to all of our executive team? And now they're able to speak the language. Then what happened from there is then they said, oh, this is really useful. Can you have someone from your team, and maybe it's not even me, come in and do an offsite to an even larger group of our executives? And now we're doing coaching for spot coaching for a whole sort of 60 of their executives.
right.
So in that particular instance, it started because the CEO, I was coaching the CEO. But there are other instances where it starts because someone has seen, listened to a podcast or, my podcast or your podcast and said, you know what, sounds really useful. In fact, this just happened a couple of weeks ago where someone had heard me on someone else's podcast and had us come in to facilitate an offsite. This is the
Hmm.
first time they'd really were aware of our work. And so now we facilitated the offsite. Now it's up to us, once we facilitated that offsite, to develop a relationship with this organization. And maybe they'll find that there's more work to do with us and maybe it was a one-off and then we're done, and that will happen sometimes. But it's really just a matter of where you can start. They hear you speak, or you start by coaching someone, you start by, doing a workshop for another company, you're on someone else's podcast, you have this opportunity to walk in the door, you do really, 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 really good work, and then look for ways to continue to serve people. And then there will be more opportunities that present themselves. And sometimes not, but that's because it's not a fit for the two of
Right.
you. But when you do good work, opportunities do open up.
Right. So you've shared with us in the early days, speaking was really the way that you were generating leads and kind of growing the business and initial revenue. Here you are today with 11 or 12 team members. So
Yeah.
your has grown considerably.
Mhm.
What does your marketing and lead generation look like today? What are you finding is working best to bring in new qualified leads and opportunities to engage with clients?
Mm. So I would say, definitely the podcast, because I think one of the things that will happen, either being on other people's podcasts or my own podcasts, because people are able to hear what you have to say and to engage with you and get a sense of who you are. During the during the pandemic, I did LinkedIn Lives every single week. So again, that was an opportunity to engage with people, to have
Mhm.
conversations. And so there was a sense of people had a sense of who I was and who we are. And so they thought, oh, I want to learn more about that. I do think that it is useful for you to write a book. Now, it needs to be a good book. Um, but if you're able to codify your ideas, then it gives people something that they can grab onto and read and again engage with that. And so it's a combination of talking about our ideas, being out in the world, whether it's the podcast, whether it's books, etc., keynote speaking, and then people find you. And oftentimes, I would say there's also some word of mouth, but it's hard to, it's sort of more word of mouth once you're inside of an organization.
Right.
But I would say in general, the top of the funnel is actually very, very important.
Mm. Do you have any initiatives going on now or in any time in the recent past where you identify an organization or person that you want to work with and you are actually, or somebody on your team is reaching out to that
Mm,
person? Or is it
mhm.
more inbound where you're putting out, as you said, the content, the ideas,
Yeah.
getting on different platforms and people are coming to you?
Yeah, you just made me think of something. One thing that we don't actually do very well, and maybe some of your, maybe you teach people how to do this. We don't do a very good job of asking for more business. I will
Mm.
say that. And I think that's something that we could do a lot better. I think we're out there so that people can find us, but I do think that we could do a better job. In fact, I'm just thinking of this happened just the other day. We had gone into a large corporation. We were doing some work with one of the senior leaders and had done a little bit of work with them. And so I said to them, I really like working with you. I'd like to do more work. Would you like to explore that? They said, I would love to.
Yeah.
But they didn't, but I had to bring it up. I had to suggest it. And so that's something that I could do a better job of. And I think most of us could, is that you're not, you're not asking for the business in the sense of my self-worth depends on you saying, yes, I want to work with you. It's more a sense of, you know what, we've done some work together. It's really good work. I really like working with you. Do you want to do more work together? And let's see if we could figure out what that looks like.
Yeah.
And I have found that when I can be in that place emotionally of not needing it, but wanting it, and it's very different, then I can ask for the business, and oftentimes we're able to find ways to continue to expand it. So I know I
Yeah.
just went off on a different path than you were expecting, but this is something I'm processing kind of right now of
Yeah.
like, there's a lot of value in just being willing to say, I'd like to do more business together. And I don't know if there's a gender thing, Michael. I think, women tend to be feminine when they're doing something for someone else, and our society is more comfortable with men asking for things. And so I do think I've had to find as a woman my way of asking for it, but I seem to be figuring out what that is. And
Yeah.
it's
No.
just saying, "I'd like to work together. Do you want to?"
Right, exactly. I know, and I'm glad that you kind of took us down that path because I think a lot of people will resonate with that. And
Mm,
so often, from a marketing perspective, as entrepreneurs or business owners, we tend to focus on new client acquisition and always doing new things, and forget about probably the best source of business, which is the people that we've already built, a relationship with, and we have trust, and we delivered
mhm,
value and outcomes for. So I'm glad that you really brought that up. One thing that I touched on, or we just kind of hit on a
mm.
little bit before we actually push the record button today, is that you have a president in your company, right? You mentioned
Yeah,
Amy
yeah,
before, and this is
yeah.
something that in a lot of smaller, kind of boutique consulting firms, you don't see that often. Typically, you have the founder or one of the
Mhm,
co-founders, and they're kind of in that CEO role, and they're quote unquote kind of running the show. They might have somebody
mhm,
who's key, but the title of president is not something that you see too often. I'm wondering, I know you
mhm.
mentioned Amy coming from a chief of staff
Yeah.
with Jim Collins, and they do amazing work. But can you kind of walk us through the thought process of
How we
how
work
that came
together.
together?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, so, it's funny that you honed in on president, because she's actually no longer the president, she's the co-founder. So,
you got to update your website then, Whitney.
yeah, so basically what happened is, and I think this is a great topic for us to discuss as well, because I think oftentimes people, when they become a consultant or an entrepreneur, they think, I need a partner. But
Mm,
one of the things that we discover, you have probably discovered, and I discovered because I made some bad business decisions earlier in my career, and I saw one of my parents make a bad business decision, is that it is harder to separate from a business partner than it is from a marital partner. So being very deliberate about taking on a business partner, it is a serious, serious, serious decision. And so again, Amy had come as chief of staff for Jim Collins. She'd built her own um, successful consulting business, multi-million dollar consulting business called White River Strategy. And but when she and I first started working together, this is like back in 2015, she found me, said, "I'd love to do a small project with you." And like we were doing a small project. And I was like, wow, she's really capable. So
Mm,
let's do another project together. And then we did another project together. Like the very first project, I think she was looking at my speaker reel and giving me feedback. Like it was that small. And so over the course of 2 or 3 years, we did more and more projects together. Then we had an arrangement for a year or 2 where it was where she received a revenue royalty of like what business that she brought in, because she was very much the chief revenue officer and negotiating all our speaker fees, et cetera. So I was kind of like the product and she was selling the product.
yeah.
And so what happened then 2 years ago is we said, you know what? We really like working together. I had actually, really been searching for a partner. I am a very a person of faith, and I had prayed to find a business partner. And I felt like this is a person, she's going to be a great partner. And
Sorry to
so,
interrupt.
yeah,
Why were you searching for a business partner? Like, what was the
what was
mindset,
the
the thought
impetus?
process?
Yeah. So I would say because I realized that building a business is it's I wanted to have if I wanted to have a consulting business that I, made $1 million a year by myself, I could totally do that.
Mm,
But if I wanted to build something and I was serious about evangelizing the ideas of growth, and I want to help people grow, and I want to make it possible for as many people to do this. I knew that there are some things that I do exceedingly well, and there are
mm,
other things that I don't do as well. And so while I had all these ideas and I'm willing to go out and evangelize the ideas, we also had to build a business. And I'm not particularly good at selling. I've gotten better at it because I've learned from Amy. One of the things that Amy does exceedingly well is she has a brilliant strategic mind in terms of here's where we can go. So she's a
mm,
7 on the Enneagram, which is the enthusiast, thinks about possibilities. So here's where we can go. But she's also able to sell. She's also able to say to people, here's where we can go. Let's do this together. And she's not afraid to ask for business. And
mm.
so now all of a sudden we've got a product, we've got a person who can see possibilities for the product, and she's great at building people and building a team. And so between the two of us, we've got this great complementarity in terms of our skill sets. And we'd had 5 years to figure out how are we going to work together, because it is difficult to work with a partner. But this about 6 months ago, we made the decision is because the business has changed so much from when I first started it. And she really is absolutely essential to where we are today.
Mm.
She is now a co-founder of Disruption Advisors because I really wanted to honor that of what she is helping build and what we're going to build in the future. So we're now both co-founders. I'm the CEO. I think she's still the president, but we're both co-founders. So
And so
again,
does
it's a
Amy also have ownership stake,
yes,
like percentage-wise in the business?
yes, she does.
Did you have any concerns around that? So I'm thinking about the person who's listening and joining us going,
Yeah.
maybe I'd also like to bring on a partner
Mhm.
because there's some areas that I'm not as strong in. I'm wondering, like, what would you counsel them on that they should maybe pay attention to
Oh
or be
yeah.
careful of? And what are the things that, like, that would make it
Yeah.
worthwhile for them to do this?
It's such a good I'm glad that you're asking this. I hope this is helpful for your listeners. So my advice would be to go very, very slowly. Again, we started working together well over 5 years ago and did really small projects to just see, can we work together? What's going to happen when we disagree? What's going to happen when I'm having a bad day? Do my triggers trigger her? So when she's at her worst and I'm at her worst, what does that mean? Like, what is that cocktail? Because like
Right.
everybody's going to have a bad day, but you need to
Mhm.
just make sure that your bad day doesn't trigger someone else's bad day in a partnership, obviously in a marriage as well. So so the first step in giving her a percentage of the business is, like I said, we had sort of this revenue royalty where, whatever she brought in, she got a percentage of that. So we were already experimenting around that. But
Mhm.
then we made the decision, okay, that's good, sort of an eat what you kill, but it also wasn't honoring the equity that she was building. And so 5 years out, 10 years out, she wasn't getting an opportunity to really participate in the upside of what she was helping build. And so we started the conversation around, do we have a partnership? Now, I will tell you, it took us a year and a half to negotiate our partnership.
Mm,
We were very deliberate. We, needed to still run the business. Let's figure this out. We figured out all the sort of deal breakers for us, focused on us being in agreement, then having the lawyers paper it, sometimes having to call our lawyers and say, no, 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 this is not meant to be antagonistic. We are going to do this. You just have to figure out how to help us do this. And
right.
so we took that year and a half to do that, so that once we did it, we had really thought through everything.
Mm,
We've had some tough conversations, but again, we built that muscle to be able to have those tough conversations, and
yeah.
we including had that conversation of, okay, this is like a marriage. Are we both committed? Because we're not doing divorce here. But we're
Mhm,
just not, and we
right.
need going to see this through. And so my advice would be, go very slowly, go very deliberately, make sure you've got several disagreements under your belt where it's really tense, you're both very triggered, and can you come out on the other side of it? Because if you can, then you've got that muscle in place, and you've got not only the complementary abilities, but also when things aren't working, you've got the skill set to move through it. And both believe, and I feel this way, and I know she does too, because we just had this offsite. We're still both like, this is so awesome that we get to work together, because I look at her and I'm like, wow, that's amazing that you can do that. And I think she does the same thing for me, where you're
Right.
continually like, my partner is really good at these things that I can't even begin to be good at. So
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a really great advice. I'm glad that you kind of took us through all that. It sounds like, just if I can summarize for a moment, that the recommendation based on your experience is take it really slow. Don't rush it. If you see
mhm,
any red flags in terms of how you disagree about things, or you can't resolve things, or if there was a feeling inside at any point that, yeah, I don't know if this is going to work, that's probably a red flag that it won't work,
mhm,
and honor that sign. But at the same time, it sounds like you started off with maybe just paying either on an hourly basis or a project basis, like in terms of
mhm,
her compensation.
mhm.
That next level from that graduated to, you'll get payment based on business that you bring in. So there's kind of a revenue
That's
royalty
right. That's
component.
right.
And then
Mhm.
from there, over a period of several years, so now 5 years later, you entered into, let's actually both own equity and shares in this business.
Right, and the ownership percentage increases over a period of 10 years, right?
Okay.
So the more value that's delivered, the more ownership, there is, and so that summarizes it well. And also, have lawyers, because you do need lawyers, but keep, make sure that they know what their job is. And I guess the final thing, listening to you play this back, Michael, is is trust your truth tellers. So as you're going through this and you find yourself getting a little because which we all do, you go to the people that you trust. In my case, it would be my husband, and say, you know what, you're being unreasonable here. This actually is a good partnership. Or, oh no, I am actually very nervous. And be
Mm,
willing to listen to those people that
yeah.
you trust. And if they're still comfortable, then you can forge ahead, and it will allow you to navigate it.
So I'm wondering, in terms of the structure of the business and kind of co-owners and that
Mhm,
partnership, why go the path of actually equity, as opposed to just saying, yeah, you get a percentage of profit, or some, why not keep 100% actual equity in the business for yourself? I'm
mhm.
kind of playing a bit of devil's advocate and thinking probably some people are wondering about this themselves. What was your thought process around that? Is it the goal of maybe selling the business in the future, or some being able to pay dividends, or why kind
Yeah.
of go that path?
Yeah, so it's a very complicated question, one that you requires lawyers and tax accountants. Um,
Mm,
and but the simple answer to your question is that if you have a partner that you're working with that is helping to build value, to create value, and if there is any sort of possibility that in the future you might sell this business, there needs to be a way for them to participate in that upside. And
mm,
so, however you need to do it, and again, you've got to consult with your lawyer and your tax accountants, on how to do that. That we created a structure so that if we were to ever sell this business, she would be able to participate in the upside. So that's
right.
that's that's the headline.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Um, Talk to me about that. So is that something that you and Amy are thinking about in the future? Like, is that just a possibility on the mind in terms of being able to sell the business down the road? And if so,
Yeah.
have you made any decisions inside of the business as you start to kind of think about that?
Yeah, so as we build the business, I think one of the things that's, with any business, there's lots of different paths that you can go. So, Amy's younger than me, so we could end up doing something where, we do this and then at some point she takes it over, which is great. We can do that.
Right.
But being very goal driven, brass ring driven, and she's very goal driven as well. I think having in our brain, are we building something that could be sold? It
Mm,
gives you this way to think about, am I building something where I'm creating value? Am
right.
I creating something that someone else would say, this is useful? And how could our business interface and interlock and be useful to other businesses? It's very helpful in getting us to focus on what we need to be building and how we need to be of service to the companies that we're working with.
Right. Well, listen, Whitney, there's so much that we can continue. I want to respect the time that we have in the calendar for the podcast here today. But I definitely want to make sure that people can learn more about your most recent book, Smart Growth, which
Mhm.
they can see behind you. But also, we're gonna make sure that we link up in the show notes. And in just a moment, you can let us know where people should go to learn more about the book
Yeah.
and more about your company. But just maybe a couple of final questions before we wrap
Mhm.
up. So clearly, I mean, you have a lot going on between publishing books and speaking and leading a team, right, of about a dozen or so people, working with some very well-known, recognized clients. Are there one or two habits that you bring into your life or part of your life, just as on a regular basis, that you feel really contribute to the success that you have as a person, as an individual, but also as a CEO and leader of a business? Anything you feel really kind of allows you to perform at those high levels?
Mm. Yeah, I would say 2 things. One is that I'm very deliberate about how I start my day. When I get up, I'm very clear on what I need to get done in the course of a day.
Okay.
I
I'm
take a
just
couple.
gonna pause for 1 second. Take us
Yeah.
into the details as much as you can. What does
Yeah.
your start of the day look like? Because I think it's such a
Yeah.
powerful, big opportunity for many people that
Mhm.
necessarily don't actually focus or think about it as intentionally as they could. So I'd love for you
Mhm.
to walk us through, like, what time do you wake up, and then what do you do for the
Yeah.
first couple hours?
Yeah. So for example, I know what I want to get done at the beginning of every week. Let me back up. We know what we have, what we want to get done for the rest of the year. So for example, we just did a beta certification and we have another certification, like an online certification that we're going to do in October
Mm,
for coaches that want to do the S curve. And we want to get the next version of our tech tool out there so that coaches and teams can use
so you
it.
have
So
kind of your annual plan.
we have those big goals. Then I know what I have on my calendar and what I want to get done this week. And am I doing things that are going to allow me to get that done?
Right.
And I'll be very intentional of like, okay, so I've got this coaching call. Am I going to make sure I show up for these people that I'm coaching this week? So all those sort of high level things. From a day perspective, the night before, I'm pretty clear about what I need to get done that next day. And there's certain things that are going to be on my calendar, but then there are also things that I know I need to move forward. Like next week, I'm doing a keynote at Lockheed Martin in Florida. I needed this morning to look at my slide deck, make sure I know what needs to get done on that so I can get it to the rest of my team so they can put out those pictures. So we're not putting out a fire a week from now.
Right.
But then when I first get up in the morning, and it depends, I've been kind of sick for the last week and a half, but usually I get up between 4:30 and 5 every day. And I'll spend a half an hour doing something that is spiritual or scriptural based, of just grounding myself on
Mhm.
something that is bigger than I am, which will include, reviewing my goals, reading the scriptural text, writing in my journal, etc. And then I'll actually sit in my bed, my poor husband. I'll sit in my bed and just start doing some work, some of the things that are important but not urgent that need to move forward. And then around 6:30 or so, I'll either do yoga or I'll run. And then at 7, some days a week, I'll have some coaching around my voice so that I can be more effective when I'm speaking and et cetera. But that's the beginning of the day, is really getting myself centered both emotionally and spiritually, and what do I need to get done and physically so that I can show up in the way that I want to show up for the rest of the day.
4:35 to many people will sound quite early.
Uh-huh.
How long have you been sticking to that, like, and where that come
Yeah.
from start?
So I would say, when I was in college, I always got up, and growing up, I got up well, in high school, I got up really early to go to seminary. So there's a religious instruction. So I got up at 5. But then in college, I always got up at 6 to practice piano for 2 or 3 hours. So I'm a very disciplined person. I would say I have pretty consistently gotten up between 5 and 6. I'd say as one gets older, it's easier to get up
Right.
earlier, which is kind of awesome. I am not complaining at all, but yeah, I would say that I've, throughout my life pretty consistently gotten up between 5 and 5:30, and just depending on the day, how late I went to bed the night before, that's just when I wake up.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much. I'm also an early riser, and
Uh-huh.
it's, to me, there's just so much power in being able to get up early and accomplish things,
Mhm.
or even just have time to think about things,
Right.
that once you start your quote unquote actual day, right, you just don't have that time, or it's much harder
Mm-mm.
to
No,
find it. That
no,
makes
once
a lot
you've done
of sense.
your first meeting, your brain, it's completely taken up. You've got to get that stuff done early, otherwise it won't get done.
Yeah. All right. So, Winnie, we're going to make sure that people can learn more about your most recent book, Smart Growth. But one question that I love to ask
Mhm.
everybody that comes on the podcast, is, within the last 6 months or so, what book, and it could be fiction or nonfiction, have you just thoroughly enjoyed, and would you recommend to others?
Oh, oh, um, I do so much reading. Um, let's see. What do I want to recommend? Okay, I'll just say,
I know this is a hard question
I
for
know
anyone
it's such a
who
hard question
reads
because
a lot.
I read so much, and then I have stuff on my phone that I don't remember what I read. But anyway, so here's a book that I'm reading right now. It's called Love, The Law of Love by Steve Young, who was a professional football player for the 49ers.
Hmm.
And I'm actually getting ready to interview him for my podcast. And it was just really, really good to hear, this professional athlete talk about love. I thought it was really, really terrific. And speaking of love, I also just read Marcus Buckingham's book, Love Plus Work, which was really terrific as well.
All right. Well, two recommendations we have
Yeah.
not yet had on the podcast, so
Yeah.
we'll put up in the show notes. And then finally, Whitney, I want to thank you for coming on. I know we could spend a lot more time just going deeper and
Yeah.
deeper into
Yeah.
conversation. There's so much that we didn't talk about in terms of disruption and, bringing that to the individual, which brings to the company. Like, I love the way that you kind of took us through and shared and kind of showed, like, the cascading effect
Mhm.
of how all that development from individual to team to business and to growth and all that, comes together. So we'll have to do that maybe another day. But before we wrap up, where
Mhm.
should people go? What's the command? Maybe the one website that they can go to learn more about you, about your book, about everything you have going on.
Yeah, I think the easiest is so my podcast is Disrupt Yourself. So you can, if you're listening to this, you like listening to podcasts, and you can definitely go listen to that. And then my website is whitneyjohnson.com, and I have a newsletter. And then my book, Smart Growth, is How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company, where I talk about the S curve as this simple visual model to think about what growth looks like. Because when you know where you are in your growth, in your consulting business, then it will help you think through what's next. So those are some different ways that you can engage with our work.
Fantastic. Whitney, thank you again so much for coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. It was a lot of fun.